I'm Bill Oughton of Oughton Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster.
Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Chantal. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Guess what?
But
You're not Bill.
so I applied for the bill understudy and I
Uh-huh.
just got approved. So hopefully
Yay!
hold on to the role.
Yay. So, yeah, actually, fun fact, guys, Bill is fine. He came on, I think, for a few episodes, but he is doing fine. Actually, he's doing better than fine. His job has just absolutely taken off. His work has absolutely taken off. And so good for him. So we give him a lot of props there. So Sandy is going to be my guest host for 6 episodes, 3 months. So yay! I'm super, super excited about that. And Sandy, do you want to introduce yourself real quick to say kind of like what you do? Because I'm excited because we're going to have a different point of view kind of than from what Bill and I do from two adjuster point of views.
Sure. So I am Sandy Avina. If you don't know me, I hope to connect with you on LinkedIn. I am a lifelong insurance nerd and work in the field of claims management and risk management, particularly with public entities. And you start out as an adjuster, as many of us do, and I will always have a place in my heart for that. But excited to talk about our topic today because there are a lot of folks in risk management who are not familiar with claims and don't have that background and can use some help in terms of how to work with their adjusters and understanding a little bit more about what they do.
Yeah, so I think for the next 3 months it's going to be a lot of fun because Sandy can be able to give us as adjusters a different kind of viewpoint of what we need to do to be better partners. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And then in a couple of weeks, we're also going to be talking about how to have those tough conversations. And I thought, also one of the things about having these tough conversations, and the thing that we're going to be mentioning again today is being that partner, picking up the phone, getting the agent or the risk manager involved in these discussions. If you haven't, do go to both of our LinkedIn sites and you can see the whole Star Wars episodes that Sandy and I did together, where we're talking about how the agent and the adjuster work together. So, fun facts. I mean, there you go. So anyway, the this topic today about how agents, risk managers, and adjusters, how we can get along, how we can we're working basically, even if we are with different companies, we're all on the same side. We're on the side of the policyholder, right? And so that's who we need to be helping, in my opinion, right there.
Yeah, 100%. We're supporting the policyholder, and I think a lot of times the pain point just comes from the need for better communication between all parties. So I always say your policyholder doesn't know what you know. And in insurance, sometimes I think we suffer a little bit from this curse of knowledge where we have this expertise and we think like, oh, they should know this, or I mentioned this to them once. We've talked about that, but it's going to be really tough to remember everything. And even when I was an adjuster, I would remember thinking, okay, I just talked to this person for 30 minutes. They're going to remember about 4 minutes of that conversation. And it's just constant, I think, repetition and education. And even when you feel like you've talked to them about this a million times, it feels like that to you, but to them, it's very new, especially if that knowledge base is starting at zero.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, Sandy, I always like to start with definitions. And since this is a podcast for adjusters, and of course, everybody can listen. I think I do have some risk managers or an agent or two listen. So what would you say that like the definition of a risk manager is?
Oof. So that is a great question. Short answer is everybody's business is your business, and all roads lead through risk management. But I think a more realistic answer is it depends on the structure of the organization. So there's what I like to call big R risk managers and little R risk managers. Your big R risk manager is somebody who that's in their title, right? They are a risk manager, they're risk management analyst, they're director of risk management, but they're usually involved in insurance procurement and the claims management, employee safety, and any sort of loss prevention measure. So they're seeing both sides of the house, right? How to
Right.
prevent it from happening, but also what to do once it happens. Then you have little R risk managers, and those are the folks who are gifted the responsibility of risk management, and that's not their role, but they are approached and said, "Hey, you're handling," and usually this is how it starts. It sneaks in.
Mhm.
Well, you're in HR, so why don't you handle the work comp? Because employee leaves are all the same. And since you're dealing with that, that has to do with insurance and renewals. There's questions I can't answer. You handle that. Hey, since you're handling that insurance renewal, here's some other insurance renewals you can help us with. And next thing you know, you are now wearing all these different hats on top of your main hat, which might be, HR or finance or maintenance and operations, transportation, wherever risk management landed. And those are your little R risk managers. And so that's a really tough position to be in because you are essentially trying to fill two roles. And that isn't even really something you may have a background in. So it really does depend on the organization. I think that's what we struggle with is that there is no standardization in terms of what risk management is and what they do. It really just depends. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I could say that the agent, like the retail agent, whether, well, I guess I should say producer, whether that be the broker or the actual agent, also fills that role of like a quote unquote risk manager because that is the person that goes, okay, so do you have people coming onto your property? Do you have customers coming onto your property? Oh, you do? Okay, so you're going to need like general liability, and you probably don't want the $1,000 in med pay because it cost $5,000 to go on an ambulance to a hospital now. So you probably want to bump that thing up to, like 5K or whatever. So I think that so that an agent or a producer, I should say, that overarching term, either be the broker or the agent, would also be a risk manager in some aspects.
They definitely do fill that consultative role. I think the gap that occurs is you'll have a business who has a broker or agent who will ask those good questions, like, do you have these things in place for loss prevention to prevent claims? But somebody actually has to execute that work.
Yeah.
And that's not really the role of the agent or the broker, right? And a lot of places don't have risk management staff. So unfortunately, a lot of times it doesn't get done at all. And we see that in the losses where somebody will come in and say, hey, by the way, you should have proper HR training, you should have safety training, you should have PPE. And they're like, great, all good ideas. And then nothing gets done. So that need is there. And we see that a lot with especially small to mid-sized organizations where they don't have anybody handling risk management. And they're assuming that the agent or the broker is going to be doing the work and they provide consultation, but they don't do the work.
Right. And so what does an agent do? I think we know what the agent, producer, broker does. They sell the insurance, and again, it's like you said, it's some kind of consultation like, well, do you need this? Do you need that? I recommend this. I recommend that. But that is really kind of it, isn't it?
It really is. I guess the exception would be if you have an agent or broker who, as part of the policy, has these value added services. And I always tell risk management professionals, you have to look at that. It isn't always about the price of the policy, right? If you
Mhm.
know that you don't have support staff to help you do these things, then you have to look and see if that policy also includes, training that's free or somebody to come down and do a safety audit or whatever the case may be because that's important if you don't have somebody who's doing that for you. So some of them have that, not all of them have that. It's usually the cost is buried somewhere if they do have that. Um, but it is something to look at for sure because the coverage is great. It's you want to have the coverage, but if you're still not doing all of the loss prevention efforts to avoid claims, that's going to bite you in the butt later on.
Right. Yeah. And so I'll tell you who isn't doing the loss managing aspect of it, and that's the adjusters, because we come in after the fact. I mean, we are literally the buck stops here kind of deal. And you and I, and the reason why I mentioned the Star Wars, videos that we had done is that you and I did allude to one of these things about how adjusters, risk managers, and or the agents can be really good partners is when the adjuster calls and says, "Hey, by the way, did you know that there's this whole, swamp in the backyard outside of this preschool and there's alligators in it. Y'all probably want to write an exclusion." I mean, that's about as close to risk management as the adjuster is going to get in that particular thing, because we don't do anything until there is a claim.
Mhm.
And I think that's very frustrating for the brokers, agents, risk managers, because we get questions in the claims department. Well, would so and so or such and such be covered if XYZ happened? And we're like, uh, like, what's the policy say? And it's not only what the policy says, but it's also what the policy says and what the facts of that particular claim are. And I hate it when attorneys say, quote, "it depends," end quote, but it depends.
It really does, right? So I think that's the, as a former claims adjuster hat, I loathe the hypothetical.
Mm,
Because they give you a hypothetical and you think, well, there's a lot of details that those details matter. The case facts matter. So I can give you a very general response for this general hypothetical, but then they take that and run with it. And then the
right.
situation comes up and they're like, well, you told me that this is what I needed to do. And so it's just a tough position to be in because I know they want to be prepared and they want to understand and learn, but hypotheticals are so dangerous because it really does depend. And I'm not a fan of that either. You pay somebody $400 an hour for them to tell you, well, it depends, but it
Depends.
really does. It really does, right? Like attorneys give that same thing with the law. They give that advice because the case facts matter.
Mm.
And you don't want to give, something too general that they hold on tight to.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where we get to where we have this misunderstanding and this overlap that maybe risk management and agents, I'm just going to call them agents because I think that's what we all refer them to rather than, producers or whatever. But I mean brokers as well. But I think that's where we get into this misunderstanding about what's covered, what's not, because I was talking to a friend of mine who is an agent or used to be an agent, and we are going to be co-authoring an article. And I said, "Oh, this will be great because I'm always going to say it's the agent's fault because the agent always says, 'Oh yeah, don't worry about it. It's covered. It's totally covered.'" And she laughed and she said, "Well, it's true. We kind of do that, but then we need to not do that." I'm like, "Yeah, because y'all don't have the license to determine coverage." And so many people don't understand that, but it is a really fine line where we get into what does the adjuster do, what does the agent do? Because who's going to get called first? Obviously, the agent is like, "Hey, do I need to turn in a claim? This happened. Oh no, it's going to be underneath your deductible. Don't do it." Or, "Oh yeah, no, don't worry about it. It's not covered." Well, you can't say it's not covered, or, "Oh yeah, go ahead and turn it in. Everything's covered." You get that quote, "all risk," end quote policy, which I hate. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tough because claims it's such a specific world.
Mm.
And there's definitely a challenge with the agents trying to sell a product. So you want to make it seem like it's this amazing thing, but it also doesn't really do the client service to not be realistic about some of the claims hurdles that they're going to face when it comes to exclusions or when it comes to coverage, because you don't want them to get upset and think like, "Oh, this policy isn't what I thought it would be," or really policyholders thinking in their mind, "I pay you this money. This means that the things that I think should be covered are covered." and they think it's a lack of service or that the agent may have not been honest from the get-go. And it's not that. I think it's just there's so much education that needs to be done.
Oh.
And it's who's going to do that education. That really is the pain point, I think, for a lot of policyholders.
Okay, so first of all, it's you and me. And
Yeah.
so all of you insurer CEOs who are listening right now, all y'all need to call Sandy and me because I guarantee you we can do a 30-second commercial that will educate the insurance consumer and still be funny.
Yes,
I guarantee it. You
we
know,
can do it.
we can do it. I mean, in fact, I would go so far as to say, what, maybe the first five free, and then if they see that we're doing a good job, then we're going to start charging them. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
I'm just, let's put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah.
Anyway, point being, I think too, the issue is because I talk to my students about this as well when we're talking about this misunderstanding between what the agent knows, maybe what the risk manager knows. And again, going back to what you were talking about, well, the risk manager may be the HR person. They went to school for HR. They did not go to school for insurance. And so they probably have the very same education that everybody else in the world has, which is none. Like you said, absolutely zero. And they're going around price comparing and they're like, okay, that sounds good. Let's go with this one, not understanding what apparel is and that sort of thing. Because who wants to sit in on an insurance class? And it's so interesting because I ask my students, I'm like, listen, guys, y'all are the next gen. How are you going to fix this problem where consumers don't know anything about your insurance policies? And they're all like, oh, let's offer webinars and da da da. I'm like, dude, oh, I'm sorry, bruh, bruh. Have you, if you were not required to be in my class, despite the fact that I'm awesome, but if you were not required to be in my class, would you be sitting here for 2 hours, 2.5 hours once a week with me talking insurance? And every single one of them says no.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm like, so why do you think some other person who isn't required to be here, no matter how educational and fun I am, is going to sit through a 2.5 hour class? 30-second commercials. That's what we need to do. Anyway,
Yeah.
off topic. Squirrel. You
But
know?
it's true, right? Like the 30-second thing I think is so true because people consume information differently. We're used to social media and YouTube shorts and TikTok, and people are looking for what can I see in this tiny, tiny 30-second window. So I
Mhm.
think it is more this trend towards what is bite-sized knowledge instead of, let's do a hour and a half long webinar on Medicare set-asides. Nobody wants to sit through 90 minutes of that. So it's how do we educate, and even if you create it in these bite-sized pieces, and they're not going to get everything, but they'll still get something, right? They'll get something versus the webinar that they're not going to bother to attend because nobody wants to sit through anything for 90 minutes straight.
Right. Okay. So to totally plug myself, which is what this podcast is all about anyway. So my book, which you very politely and kindly promoted, the first poem on it, or in the book, Once Upon a Claim, is the Three Blind Mice, and the point of that is to teach you how to read a policy. And when I talk to my students about that, I will read that policy. I say, look, I can do it in 30 seconds. Or I'll read that poem, nursery rhyme, and I'm like, look, I can do it in 30 seconds. I can make you a 30-second commercial right here, flat, boom, someone time me. And so I'll read that out. I'll read maybe the first paragraph after, which is the moral of the story. And then I'll say something to the effect of like, contact your agent to find out more, or, you're in good hands when you contact us, or we're a great neighbor because we're going to tell you more about this, or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that was 30 seconds, right? I did not tell you how to read a policy by reciting Three Blind Mice and all of that. But the point is now that you know a little bit more, you know a little bit to make you dangerous. And it's not to say that we can't keep going on and having a whole series. Anyway, we are way off topic, but you know what I mean? I know you know what I mean because I love this about you. This is great.
Yeah.
This is what happens to Bill and me. We just get off on topics and tangents and we're like, oh wow. And 3 hours have passed.
That's okay. The road leads back. You just make a U-turn. It all
Yeah,
works.
that's right. It does. The world is round. We keep going
Yes.
that way. So, one of the things that I think is a big point, though, when we're talking about the agent and adjuster kind of synergy that we have, is that the insured will see the agent as their person, not necessarily maybe the risk manager, like either the big risk manager, because I know some places, maybe Aon or um, who is it? The Hartford, I think, has some, that just go in and that's like all they do. But if the insured has a problem, they usually go to their agent. And I have encouraged adjusters here on this podcast, do the same thing, man. Use that agent to your advantage because again, we're all on the same side,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, I think it really depends because, and this is in work comp specifically, we see employers who have like a really close relationship with their adjuster because they're talking to them every day. And when that happens, sometimes they are asking the adjuster questions that they should be asking their agent or their broker, just because they've had that relationship established. And then that becomes a little bit dicey because they look at the expertise and they think, oh, you can tell me what to do. But sometimes the questions are more employment law questions and their legal questions, and even questions that might be beyond the scope of the agent and the broker. And I think that's confusing for policyholders too, to understand where do they go for these different questions? Like who do they reach out to as a resource? We see that in general liability as well, where they have questions for their adjuster and like, it's not an adjuster question, that's your internal counsel question, but you shouldn't be asking the adjuster that question. So I think
Yeah.
policyholders are really looking for who can give me the answer the fastest. And sometimes that is who do they have the access to? If it's the adjuster that they're talking to all the time, if it's their agent or broker, but sometimes even internally, they don't have that relationship to reach out and ask for questions to legal counsel or who they should be asking.
I think that's a great point that you've just made is it's whoever they have on the phone at the time because and I think again, and this goes back to education aspect for our policyholders, is they feel if we are passing them around that we're blowing them off. I
Mhm.
I cannot tell you how many times I have been asked, first of all, like, what do you mean this is denied? What does my policy cover? And B, what am I paying premiums for? Well, you're paying premiums if a tornado knocked down your house, not the burst pipe or whatever it happened to be. And I mean, obviously don't think that's a funny thing. I do, but whatever. No sense of humor, policyholders, besides the fact. But I do think that, again, it goes back to that educational aspect. But I have said this time and time and time again that if you're trying to get in touch with the policyholder and you know that you're going to have a hard conversation, much like what we're going to be talking about in a couple of weeks, pick up the phone and not only call the policyholder so that they can hear the tone of your voice, uh, and you have to put it in writing anyway because this is what the Unfair Trade Practice Acts talk about, which again we'll also be talking about later on in the year. And then two, I usually start the year January 1st with going over those things again because it is so incredibly important to go over it time and time and time and time again. Because I cannot tell you how many expert witness cases I have because some idiot uh, adjuster has not done what they're supposed to be doing. Anyway, bygones, squirrel. What you need to do is pick up the phone and like call the agent. Just like what Chantel was doing with Sandy in our Star Wars thing is like, hey, did you know that this was going on? Just want to let you know that I'm going to be denying this claim. And you're going to be the very next person that they call because the agent is going to be like, what kind of policy did you sell me? Why did you sell me this policy? Yeah, da, 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 da. And it would be a great opportunity for the agent to sell more insurance. Oh, yeah, like that wasn't covered. I told you it wasn't covered. Here's your piece of paper where you signed it that I told you that it wasn't covered. Um, but I think now a lot of people, when I say this, like pick up the phone and talk with the agent, talk with the insured, let them know the sound of your voice and all this. I have so much pushback from that saying that, oh, people don't want to be called. You know, this Gen Z, they want to be texts, or the millennials, they want to be texted and da 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 da. These things do not go across well in text.
Yeah.
And one of the best things that I actually had done for me when I had a claim was I received a text. I received a text and it said, your adjuster is going to be calling you between 9 and 9:30. Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Damn it. No, I didn't really say damn it, but it would have been funny had it done that. But anyway, no, but it said your adjuster's going to be calling. I think it even said it will be from this area code. You know, pick up the phone. Because so many of us don't pick up the phone now with all of the spam calls that we get.
Yeah, I think it's really important to tell them that, right? So they can prepare, because some people need to prepare themselves for a telephonic conversation, which cracks me up because I've always been a phone person.
Mhm.
I'm not a, and I get it. I get the appeal of, the asynchronous communication. I'll reply to you when I get a chance. But the problem with that is you have this email chain that's like 4 days old from people going back and forth. And I'm like, we could have hammered this out in a 10-minute phone call.
Yeah.
This is so much longer than it needs to. And you're right, you can't read tone in an email. And I know some people who are what I like to call harsh email writers, meaning just the way they write the email feels very like raise
For
your
all of you who are who
hand.
are listening rather than watching on YouTube, I just raised my hand and pointed to myself. I'm one of those people who just get into it. Dear idiot, your claim is denied. Why did you even put this in here? And then I run it through Chat GPT to say, please make this sound polite. And then it's like, dear valued customer, appreciate your time with us and blah, blah, blah. You are important, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, sorry
Yeah.
I interrupted.
But I love the immediate self-awareness of yes, that's me.
Yeah, it's totally me, man.
But again, some people they read into it, even if the tone isn't harsh, sometimes if it's just direct. And they think like, oh, are you upset? Are you, I think so much of that can be avoided if they hear your voice, they can read your tone, and they can ask their questions instead of the just email and text. I think there's just a lot that's missing there.
Yes. And I'll tell you what else, and it's not only those of us, and I mean I am a pretty direct person. I have been trying to be better at it now that I'm self-aware of it. But it also deals a lot with how or when the person who is reading it, what their mental state is in.
Mhm.
Because I could be joking, not that I would in a work email, unless I'm doing it to another colleague, but not, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, and if that person, their son just gave them lip and they had a flat tire and then they spilled coffee all over themselves and they've got a meeting and they didn't have a shirt to change it. I mean, like everything went wrong that morning and they got my email where I'm like, hey, dummy, how you doing? They're going to read it like, hey, dummy, how you doing? Yeah, and their mental filter could take that down as something bad, and that's when it all goes wrong. And I and the reason why this is a very important topic for me is in addition to us as adjusters working with risk managers and agents, is that we do kind of miscommunicate often. And I have read, again, in my expert witness files, I'm looking at this and I realize the emails going back and forth that the plaintiff attorney, for example, and the adjuster are talking at odds at one another. Whereas if you would have just picked up the phone and said, I do not understand what you are not understanding.
Mhm.
Please help me. I think I'm explaining myself well. Obviously, I'm not because you still don't understand. So tell me where I'm going wrong. And that stops this, which also may stop the litigation, which of course keeps down your loss adjustment expenses, which insurance companies love when we do that.
I think part of it too is people, like I say this all the time, people don't read their emails.
Hmm.
They just kind of glaze over the email, but they're not really reading it, especially if it's like this long thread. So I see so many issues in the claims documentation where I'm going through the thread and I'm like, oh, they weren't reading. They picked the first line and they answered part of it, but not all of it. And the context was already down here and somebody already addressed that question. And it's just part of everybody's so busy and they're just trying to get this stuff out, like, oh, let me respond to this email. But again, all reasons why to have that telephone call is so important. You just it's the quickest point from A to B. You get to ask your questions, you get clarity, and then everybody's on the same page. And then there's no, misinterpretation of tones or feeling that somebody is that you have to be on the defensive, whatever the case may be. It's
Yes.
just so much easier that way. And I think we can avoid that if we just have make the call when we need to make the call. But I am surprised. I do see a lot of people who they don't want to call people. They're just uncomfortable with having the conversation in general, or that fear of what if the policyholder is upset? What if, the agent is upset? What if they don't want to have a tough conversation?
And I love that. And I think when we talk about this in a couple of weeks, I will say this and then I'll say it again. And I've said it before, do role play. And everybody immediately goes to this sexual fetish thing. It's not what I'm talking about. And all y'all need to get your minds out of the gutters.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, when I was at Liberty Mutual, I guess I was too dumb to know better, basically, is what it was. I was too dumb to know better. And so, I mean, I would pick up the phone, start talking to people. They're going to yell at me. I don't care. You don't know me, you know? And there were all of these adjusters who came after me who were, again, they were very afraid. And I was still probably a very new adjuster. But management, for whatever purpose, realized that I was too stupid to know better and started saying, hey, will you be the claimant or the insured? And let's role play recorded statements. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, because what is the thing that the people are most afraid of? And that's being yelled at. None of us want to be yelled at. Like, yeah, let's sign up for a job where we're going to be yelled at for 8 hours a day. That sounds like a great job. No wonder we don't have any adjusters. People wanting to be adjusters. I mean, come on. And so I accidentally made one woman cry. I didn't mean to, but the point being that I was mean, I was uncooperative, I was all of these things, and people realized, oh, is this the worst that could happen? And I'm like, yeah, that's the worst that can happen. They're like, oh, okay, they got over their fear. But that's what we need to do because, yeah, when you tell someone, okay, you got pen and paper, I'm going to tell you that your claim is not denied. I'm going to tell you why it's not denied, and then I'm going to send you a letter. And speaking of the email thing, you can send those letters and emails, but do not send the denial as an email,
Mhm.
because you're right, we skim it. And when we get a formal letter, that's better because for whatever purpose, we are still, I think, trained to believe that letters are important, emails are informal.
Mhm. I think so. I think there's something about the physical nature of having to open a letter where you're like, oh, well, now it's in my hands. I got to actually read it.
Mhm.
Versus when it's electronic, there's so much of the scrolling. There's so much of this, like it's so easy for us to just go on autopilot and not really pay attention. But yeah, physical letter that does change people's behavior.
Yeah, and again, you can even send that denial letter or reservation of rights letter via email as an attachment. What I'm saying is, I would snail mail it still, but what I'm saying is don't put it in the body. I would say, dear policyholder, read attached.
Mhm.
Don't put, dear policyholder, your claim is denied, and here's why in the body, because again, people, it's too informal in
Yeah.
my thing. Yeah, so phone calls, I would text or email, and I always asked too, and I don't know if you do this. I guess you do, 'cause, well, you work with schools, I think, so
Mhm.
you're always like having to call people after 3 p.m. It's like, when am I going to call you? 3 p.m., but find out when is a good time to call someone. Like, okay, so when are you going to be near your phone? Because some people work where they can't have their phones handy.
Yeah, or they want to have the conversation, but they don't want to be in an area where everybody's listening to them, and I can understand that too. So it does help to say, okay, well, this conversation is probably going to take about however many minutes you think it's going to take. And I
Yes.
always tell them, overestimate, don't underestimate. So if you think it's
Oh,
going to be a
absolutely.
minute conversation, tell them it's going to be 40 minutes. And that way, like when you're done, hey, like, hey, great, you answered all the questions instead of going over. So if
Yes.
they're prepared, then you're going to get a better response from them.
Yes, absolutely. Do the Scotty aspect and say, oh, it's going to be 30 minutes. Okay, so it's going to be an hour and a half. I'm giving it all she got, Captain. I don't know how much more we can give her. Yeah. So what else can agents, or I guess what can adjusters do to help risk managers be better at their jobs, or help agents be better at their jobs? Do,
I think it's really just getting on the same page. So I'll share an experience I had when I first started out as an adjuster. Um, we participate in file reviews, and I did work comp, and I would have these file reviews where we're giving them an update to status of the claim. And it wasn't uncommon for like the brokers to just pick everything apart during these file reviews. And I'm thinking, I don't hear from you, most of the time. And then all of a sudden you show up and you're picking apart the work. And it's really frustrating because as adjusters, you're dealing with partial information in real time. You have to make a decision based on partial information. Everything is 2020 after the fact. So hindsight's always 2020. So the broker has the benefit of hindsight. The adjuster doesn't at that point in time, right? So it was really discouraging. And I thought, why are they just picking apart my work? And then I had someone give me the best advice. And they were like, they are not as familiar with claims as you are, but they have to show their expertise and their value during these file reviews in front of their client. That's why they're picking apart the work. You need to make sure that you're deferring to them for expertise so they feel included. And that changed the game for me, where all of a sudden I would have something, and before the file review, I would say, hey, here's what I think we should do. However, I'm going to defer this over to you, Mr. and Mrs. Broker, because what do you think? Based on your expertise and what you've seen with their clients, do you agree with this course of action? Now they get to play, yes, I was deferred to as the expert. I'm part of this decision-making process, and now you're on the same page. So if later new information comes in or the claim doesn't go the way you expect, it's not just you. You both were part of that decision. You
right.
brought them in. So that was a game changer for me to understand the position that they're in because they sold the policy, because they have to also be experts when they're really not claims experts, right?
Right.
And that's a tough position. So I think that really helped if you're an adjuster to understand that perspective of how do you bring them in as part of that decision making process, defer to them for questions. And they don't have to be the decision maker, but you can say, hey, here's what I want to do. What do you think? What have other clients done? What are your thoughts on this? And then there's some ownership on both sides. So now you're a team. And I think policyholders appreciate that too. They're like, oh, well,
Mhm.
they're talking, they're working together. I think that creates for a better service.
And I think too, it goes back to what we're talking about, is that broker or the agent or whomever, that is the insured's quote unquote person. so many more times. And the reason why I always say, call the agent, drag them into it, into this whole mess. Like if you're having a hard time getting in touch with the insured, call the agent. Um, the insured doesn't believe that XYZ is needed, call the agent because they trust the agent. You're just some voice from 3 states away, And so I totally love what you're saying is get those people involved, and the insured then sees, oh, okay, I've made a good decision in getting with this company or whatever. And then if we have to deny it, that agent is like, yeah, you're right, darn adjuster. But
Yeah.
then we've got this endorsement right here, or whatever. Yeah, so I like that. I like that thing. Yeah. What else could adjusters do to help out agents or risk managers?
I think it's good for them to give the perspective of what they're seeing as a pattern,
Mm,
because the number of people who don't look at their loss runs and really understand what's going on. And I think there are risk managers, and I'm like talking little r risk manager, meaning the policyholder, right? The person
right, right.
who's uh they anecdotally know what their losses are, but sometimes that's not what the data shows.
Right.
And it's good for the adjusters to say, like, hey, we've had, a lot of new losses coming out of this one department, or we had a lot of at this one property. We're seeing a lot of issues. What's going on over here? Because they may be busy and they may not be catching that pattern. And the adjuster letting them know that, letting the agent know that too, that,
Yes.
hey, when you talk about renewal, have you talked about this property? What's going on? Like, what information do you have? I think that's really important.
I have a story about that actually. We had a class of business which was like tattoo removal and med spa kind of things
Mhm.
out in California, I believe, actually, where the laser removal or the tattoo removal laser machine would miraculously jump off of a shelf and fall to the floor all by itself. It was amazing. And it always was like
Mhm.
3 years after it got purchased, which is
Mhm.
also amazingly right when the warranty was over. And so, I mean, we would end up having to pay 20, $30,000 for these new laser equipment stuff to remove your tattoos. And we started noticing after like the fourth or fifth one that a lot of med spas are obviously haunted because these lasers are behind locked doors, man. And this happened at, night.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the nurse was accidentally dropping them or anything. I mean, the place was closed, right? So it was like a ghost story. And you cannot subrogate, by the way, the dead. We've tried, but you can't do it. And
Yeah. How do you serve the notice?
I mean, right? We tried at the gravesite, but it didn't. We even did Beetlejuice 3 times, and he wouldn't have it. So, we finally went. We had this form that we called notice to underwriters, which is really to the agent. And as the claims department, we would say, hey, we've noticed that there's been a lot of accidental, wink, wink,
Mhm.
droppings or whatever after 3 years. And y'all do what y'all want with that. And because I mean, we can't, as the claims department, tell the agents or the underwriters what to do. But they did put on an ACV policy, like, okay, so if I don't know, your laser thing is over 3 years old, we're going to pay you ACV.
Mhm.
And so we're just not going to do it. And so, yeah. So that is a great example. claims adjusters, if you're seeing some kind of pattern, get everybody involved. It's not necessarily SIU material, but see if we can't help the insured get rid of their ghosts.
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to the impact of the shortage of adjusters and turnover too, because it means you're not going to see the pattern if you weren't around to see the pattern happen, right? So you have turnover, people are just looking at what's the most recent thing, and
Mhm.
nobody's looking back to identify those patterns. So that's really tough. Like when you have an adjuster who's been with you for a long time,
Mhm.
that's so valuable because
Mhm.
they know, they're like, oh yeah, you know what? You usually get a lot of losses this time of year. You usually get a lot of losses at this location. Like
Mhm.
they'll see those patterns and they remember that. But when you have a lot of turnover, a lot of that is missed.
Yeah. So I think one of the things, and tell me if I'm wrong, as we kind of like wrap up here, final takeaways and all this kind of stuff. How do you feel? And I'm just going to ask as more like an agent risk manager kind of deal, when the adjuster basically tells y'all like to back up off me because you are not the claims adjuster. I'm the one who is determining coverage. And I know that you're preening or whatever, but yeah, maybe back off. I mean, you can be an advocate. I don't have a problem with that. And God knows adjusters get the claims coverages wrong. Tell me that, but don't come up all in here saying, well, we get bad customer service. And please. I got like 150 more of these phone calls I gotta hear about, you know? Um,
I think a lot of it is expectation setting. So
mm,
it's if you have a policyholder who maybe hasn't gone through the claims process a lot, they may have a very different idea of what kind of communication and how frequent it should be because in their mind, again, this is part of this idea that they think, oh, you're a service provider, I pay you money, you provide me the service that I want. Like, that's not how it works. So it's setting the expectation of here's when I'm going to contact you. And there are times during a claim when there is no activity for a period of time. It doesn't mean the claim isn't being worked, but it does mean that you'll be notified when there is an update and just making sure that it's reasonable because I work for a public risk pool and we oversee the work of the TPAs and part of our role is to make sure that we are setting those expectations for the employers and for the clients so that they understand, yes, here's what the adjuster's job, here's our job, here's your job, and here's how you can expect communication to flow. Because some of them think it should be, well, I want a status update every week. I'm like, that's not really reasonable. Things aren't necessarily happening every single week on certain claims. There wouldn't be an update.
yeah.
So it's just making sure that you set those expectations because I do think every time you're pulling the adjuster to say, give me an update on this, that means they're not actually working the claim. So it's important to be mindful of that for policyholders. And the other thing that kind of a pet peeve of mine is TPAs and carriers have put so much work into creating portals where policyholders can go in and you can see the documentation, you can see letters if there's a denial, you can see all of that.
Mhm.
And nobody wants to use the portal. And they're
Mm-mm.
like, I want the adjuster to call me and tell me. I'm like, okay, but that's not the best use of their time.
But you're
They
also not answering the phone when we
right.
sorry.
Yeah. And it's like they like go into the all that information is there. But they're like, well, I prefer the service where they call me and tell me. I'm like, okay, cool. But guess what? They're not doing them. Now they're not working the claims and things get behind. So you can't have it both ways. You
Right.
gotta you gotta pick your poison here. Do
Yeah.
you want the constant phone calls where nothing's really getting done? Or do you want to take the effort to log into the portal to have access to the information that it's your policy, it's your claim.
I
So
love
I try to push for that.
I love that what you said basically, and I encourage adjusters to do this when at the very first phone call that they have with the insureds, which is Mr. and Mrs. Insured, this is your claim. This is how long it's going to take. You're not going to get your settlement next week. Yeah, I mean you're just not. especially if it's a catastrophe claim. And again, it's overestimating. It's setting this expectations. I worked at a third party administrator, and so we worked, the continental United States. And so I would say, look, I'm going to assign this out to an independent appraiser. He has 24 to 48 hours to send that back to me, acknowledging the assignment. He also has 24 to 48 hours to contact you. If you don't hear from him within, let's say, 5 business days, you call me
Mhm.
and let me know. But then he's supposed to go out within 5 to 7 business days to look at the property. Well, we're now into, and I would break this out to the injured. We're now into 2 weeks after the loss, Mr. and Mrs. Insured, and so giving them that timeline because they think that we're going to be out there, at 11 o'clock at night looking at the roof or whatever, and we're not. Um, and so letting them know, well, I've got, I don't know, 15 business days to do that. 15 business days is 3 weeks, y'all.
Mhm.
That's 3 weeks. That's almost a month. Now, you normally don't want to take that long, but I love the fact that you've said that you're setting these expectations. So adjusters, we're kind of shooting ourselves in our foots, our foots, our feets. I don't know. We're shooting ourselves, dang it. We're shooting ourselves if we're not doing that, setting these expectations. I love that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think my big piece of advice that I would always give when I worked at a TPA and I had a team of adjusters, and I would tell them, never tell them I'll call you back later or I'll call you back when I'll get an answer. You have to give them a day and a time.
Mm.
Always overshoot. So if you think it's going to take you 3 days to get it, you need to tell them I'll get back to you in 5 days. And then when you do it in 3 days, you're a hero. And if you didn't, you gave yourself a cushion. But if you say like, oh, you know what, let me find out and I'll call you back, in their mind, that could be, okay, I expect a call in 30 minutes because they don't understand what it takes for you to get that information.
Yes, because they don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Mhm.
And they think that you are ignoring them. I love that. What I would do, and I would add one caveat to that too, is if you do say, I'm going to call you by 4 p.m. Central Time, put it on your calendar.
Yeah, that's
Do not think that you are going to remember because you are not going to remember.
yeah.
Because if you do not call these people back, you are the lying SOB that they thought you were. Okay, you are the lying SOB that they thought you were. Put it in your calendar. Even if you say, listen, I'm gonna call you in 2 days, put it in your calendar. You've got to do it
Yeah.
because you are not gonna remember. You're not gonna do it. And if you call them and you get voicemail and the voicemail is like, this voicemail is full, you can't leave a message, then you send them an email. I tried to leave you a voicemail at this number, couldn't do the I've reached out to you like I said I was going to, because otherwise you are the lying SOB that never thought we were. Okay, so I think we've like killed this subject,
Yeah.
obviously, but
I
we're
think
gonna
we
talk
fixed
about
it.
it again some
Yeah,
more.
I think we fixed it. We fixed all the problems.
We fixed the whole
The whole
world.
thing.
The
Yeah.
whole world. But
Where can where can we
we're,
send the bill?
yeah, exactly. We're gonna send it to everybody. But what we also have in 2 weeks, we have another listener question. So yay, guys! If y'all have listener questions, if y'all like, we have 6 listeners. So our 6 listeners, please give us a email. Let us know what burning questions you have. We have a listener question from listener Dave, so it's going to be super exciting. We're going to be talking about dwellings and kind of like what the landlord's uh, duties are if a building or dwelling can't be rented because of some maybe horrific crime happened, or I've actually had them where the tenants were cooking meth in the
Oh
house.
my
And
gosh.
so, yeah, so much fun. So fun. I love claims. Claims are so much fun. So yeah, that'll be coming up in 2 weeks as well. So drop us a line. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, all of that kind of fun stuff because it helps the algorithm pick us up.
Yeah. Tell your stories. Everybody's
Yes.
got a claim story.
Yes, absolutely. Tell your stories. So, Sandy, we will see you in 2 weeks.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.autin.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.